Hello, and welcome to the session on Unmasking Memoirs Personal Truth Across Borders. They say migration is at the core of human history. Who leaves, who stays, and who determines all of that? And those who leave, do they lose everything? And those who stay, do they have anything to gain? Let's discuss all this and more with three beautiful women Dr. Nishi, Mona Verma, and Debalina. So, without further delays, let me just go to Dr. Nishi, the author of The Inheritance of Taste. Nishi, you use food as your use to say you use food as as an anchor to stay in touch with your roots and through with your culture. Throughout the book, The Inheritance of Taste. Can you just tell us a bit about that? How did food, give you that grounding, growing up very far away in Calcutta?
Um, well, as I look back, as I work with food for this book, what I realized is that the Andhra part of my identity has to do entirely with food. I grew up in North Calcutta. And for people who know Calcutta, that is the older part of Calcutta and quintessentially more of Bengali rather than a cosmopolitan kind of a place. And so I grew up being very familiar with the Bengali language, with the Bengali culture. And most people actually mistake me for a Bengali till I tell them my surname, and then they are absolutely surprised. I mean, people here think of me as a Bengali most of the time, but it is the food part of my family, of my parents, and me growing up. The food part has been absolutely Telugu, has been absolutely the Andhra kind of food. That is not to say that there haven't been food from Bengal or from Punjab entering, because we had a Punjabi neighbors entering into our cuisine. But as I began to work on this book and as I began to talk more about food and document several things that I talk about in the book about food, about culture, about identity, I think the food part is the one that is quintessentially, because I've been asked by several people when I was working on the book and even later on as to whether my mother and I are able to recreate the Andhra kind of cuisine. And so our kitchen, my mother's kitchen, would be one where you would get the stone grinder, which of course in the 80s went out of use because the mixer or the grinder came in. And then much later on, I got a wet grinder, which kind of recreates the stone grinder, but is an electrical mechanical thing as well. And several other elements. I mean, I cannot do without my morning cup of filter coffee even today. And, so there are these several things which the Andhra part of my identity is rooted in, right? The idli cooker, several specific kind of steel utensils which my mother got on her trips back home, the chembu, that is the lota that you have used very often in the household. So today, of course, I use it for a different purpose altogether, but it's there very much. And even though I have now moved on to a coffee maker, the filter is still there. I haven't, let it go. So uh, and I think as I was working on this book and documenting all of it, I became even more conscious of how this part of my identity was retained. Of course, I do have to say that the cuisine that formed part of my mother's kitchen and my kitchen is a little tempered down. It's not that hot and fiery as Andhra cuisine is. And also the Sa quotient has reduced. This would happen given the kind of space that we have lived in. So I mean, yes, my parents, even other things that had to do with Andhra cuisine, the Andhra part of my identity were also part of our world. But food is one place where we've kind of retained, the essence of what it would mean to be an Andhra in a world which is so very in a city that's so very far away. I even remember Dipankar asking me whether my mother was able to source many of the things that would be essential for a Telugu kitchen in Calcutta. There were times when she had to make do, with other things, but she nevertheless tried to kind of hold on to that part.
Thank you, Nishi. And it's interesting how even kitchen utensils, kept you in touch with your roots, with your
Yeah,
ancestry. And yeah.
because the stone grinder in Calcutta my mother came to Calcutta in 1969 after she got married, and the stone grinder was not available. So it was 6 months before the stone grinder made its journey from Kakinada to Calcutta. My uncle carried it all the way to Kolkata because it was not available in Calcutta. So, and Telugu kitchen could not do had to have a stone grinder. So there were ways and means in which these things were sourced. And I speak about all of that in the book, coffee powder and other kinds of staples of the Telugu kitchen.
Yeah, thank you, Nishi. And moving on to you, Mona. Yeah, in your beautiful book, A River Remembers, there's also coming and going and leaving and migration. And for the one who is supposed to leave, who is forced to leave, rage is inevitable. So how did you get to portray that with your characters, especially since some of them, Kate, all of them have a very subtle way of expressing rage. Wouldn't know until the end. So was it difficult to portray that rage?
Thank you for your question, Monisha. So, I'm very happy that you could actually unearth those subtle nuances of my writing because rage is inevitable. But in my book, it doesn't always announce itself very loudly. My characters do not have very volatile dialogues, albeit in real life, for people who migrated after the partition of Hindustan into India and Pakistan. Rage as well as grief settled very quietly in many people. Right. Some people became very angry. Some people were extremists. They were revolutionaries. And also at that time, there were people who were moderates as well. And there were some, like my grandfather and grandmother, who became silent. Right. And they continued to live their lives while, they were carrying those invisible wounds. So my grandfather, after every story from Pakistan, from his days in Ghakkad Mandi, would say, जब पत्थर मारने आए तो वो भी साथ आए जिनका गुनाह मैं अपने सर लिया करता था. Suddenly, the most dangerous stranger is a person who was your most loved neighbor. So rage and grief would go hand in hand, right? Now, otherwise, he wouldn't say anything, no expletives, nothing about anybody's religion, just a silent, raw agony that was there. So when I grew up listening to those dialogues, those anecdotes, those stories, I wanted to honor that quiet reality. So my characters also, when you've of course read the book, my characters really deliver very dramatic speeches, right? Because I believe that the deepest emotions that they all were nursing were better expressed by staying quiet and through their actions. So their pain appears in their choices. You look at Mahua, what choice she makes. You look at Hamid, what choice he makes to kill himself. When it comes to Mahua, there's so much of venom that she spews when she sees Yashvir again, when she sees Emma again, and finally when she sees Amy. Right. So the pain appears in their choices, their silence, and the things that they do, and also in the endurance. So, as a writer, I was interested not only in that rage of losing their homeland, of losing their people, but also what comes after it. So how does a person continue to live after such a loss? How does a person continue to live after they have migrated to another place, lost everything that was dear to them, when everything that they'd collected all their lives, things that were like pivotal to their lifestyles, were just concise to one trunk. So when Nishi spoke about the silbatta, right, that is what you were talking about, Nishi, the stone grinder. That is what she was talking about. So I remember my grandmother coming to India and talking about so many things that she wouldn't find in India, right? The so-called Hindustan for her. There was rage. Kaise banao? Kahan se laun? I don't know how to cook with all these ingredients. I don't have sufficient stuff. So, rage manifested itself in various spheres. And because the times were uncertain. So, like with uncertainty of migration also comes fear. And fear always invokes rage, anger. Why? What did we do to deserve this? We were not the people who drew the line. Suddenly you're sleeping on the night of 14th of August 1947, and you are waking up in a place called Pakistan because somebody has drawn the line, and your brother is in Hindustan. So of course there is grief, there is rage. So for me, the river that remembers is ultimately less about anger, more about resilience. It also suggests that healing cannot be erased. Sorry, grief cannot be erased, and people carry it on with dignity, generations after generations. And then towards the end of the book, where finally Amy comes for Mahua, there is another form of rage, that there is another form of anguish, that there is, because the collective wounds of so many people who migrated, or the ones who were left behind, right, they rarely heal with a single generation. So I wanted to show the anger in all the generations, right from Kulbhushan to Naz Bibi to Hamid to Mahua to Emmy and Emma. So all this rage basically was stemming um, from fear, from fear, and the very fact that they did not deserve to be where they were. So that is how, and I did not want very very loud or collective. I wanted to basically focus on the collective grief, which manifested itself through actions more than dialogues.
Beautiful. Thank you, Mona. And yeah, this goes
Thank
on to show how much political is also personal.
you.
Debalina, moving on to you. In your forthcoming historical literary fiction that deals with exile, I don't want to mention the title. I guess a listener should hear it from you. The people who are forced to leave, because of the exile, those who are forced to cross borders, they hold on to, material objects as some form of memory, be it prayer beads or bracelets. And how do you think, can you tell us a little bit about material memory and what kind of thoughts went into it, especially given that our own memories are truly deceiving in many ways?
Thank you for asking this question, Moisha. I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
So, when I was growing up, as a young reader and as a young writer, I used to love writing autobiographies, instilling life into something that is inanimate. And I remember one of the essays that I had written, an autobiography, was of a dilapidated temple. It was the very idea of it, of bringing something as dead and dilapidated into, alive. My novel, it's called Kalimpong, The Ridge of Lost Names. It is a commissioned novel, and the idea came from my publisher, Dipankar. And he gave me just 3 clues to put together everything. Kalimpong, Tibet, and a woman protagonist. So what do you make out of it, right? So thus began my, reading about, not just about Kalimpong, Tibet, but also about migration literature And Mona, your book was also one amongst, some 30 books that I've read over the last 1 year while writing this book. And gradually I started reading about, the talking fig trees and the, water droplet that travels across generations. And that idea struck me that this novel has to have a lot of such objects, material objects. So there are prayer bells, there are bracelets, there are photographs that takes the story forward, but not just not just these little material objects that we have. I also was reading about Dr. Emoto's research on you have water and you say very nice things to water, right? Like, this is the glass of water. You say, you're very pretty, you calm me, you're very nice, right? And what he did was he crystallized this water. So one glass of water, he was telling all kind and beautiful things. Another glass of water, he was telling all harsh things. You are ugly, you are to no good, things like that. And then he crystallized the water. He looked under the microscope, and then he figured that the water crystals, the water to which you said good things, they form very beautiful flowery patterns, very symmetrical. And the other glass, which had the bad word water, when you crystallize those, they form very random. No, I mean, there were no symmetry. It was very ugly shaped thing. So we know that 70% of the earth is water. Our human body is majority, it's water. The air has water droplets. We have rain, we have the river, we have clouds. So every time that we speak good things, goodness, if the crystals are changing, that means something is getting absorbed, everything around us. So why not tell a story from the point of view of the clouds, which is nothing but a bag of water droplets that has been there for generations. In 1949, from where the story starts, till about 1982, where the story ends, why not have? So material objects, inanimate objects form a very important part of this book, and it felt very powerful to empower these things with, the voice to say that I came from somewhere, I belong from somewhere, even if I am just a prayer bell, just a bracelet. These are the things that are binding the stories, the characters together, even though they are, separated due to the exodus from Tibet to India during the Chinese attack, when along the same time when Dalai Lama flees to India. Even though they are separated from their loved ones, these are the things, material things, that bind them together in their memories, hopefully to meet someday, maybe not.
Very well.
Thank you, Debbie. That was beautiful. And Nishi, moving on to you, this once again about memory. So within your four walls and even beyond it, your mother's memory and her insistence on the language, on speaking Telugu at home, it kind of, defined belonging to you in many ways, and it helped you understand what it is to belong. And given that, in this question is very interesting because at a later stage you say your mother, due to Alzheimer's, she ends up losing her memory. So can you elaborate how your mother's memory helped you define your own roots? And what was it like when that fundamental part of your own belonging was lost at a later stage? Of course, you were an adult then and you had come to an acceptance. But this question would ideally be for your mother, but you can speak for her.
Yeah, I was thinking about, the moment you said memory, I was thinking about what happened to my mother later on, because she had Alzheimer's for 11.5 years. And one of the things that's most affected by memory is, by Alzheimer's, is of course memory. My mother's, you're talking about how her memory, worked in kind of creating the space that she had. And one of the things that I remember her talking about is that even before she came to Calcutta, this was the first time she was moving beyond Andhra Pradesh after she got married. This is undivided Andhra Pradesh then. And when she came here, she often spoke about her journeys at various points of time. And one of the things that I do remember her saying is that, Bengal wasn't completely unknown to her because she was an avid reader. And she often spoke about how she had some idea of the Bengali socio-cultural space through novels which she had read. And she used to speak of an author called Sharat Babu. Sarat Babu is what she used to say, who of course is Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay, the Bengali novelist who was translated into Telugu. And for someone who's growing up in Andhra and somebody who reads a lot, it was but natural that she would have read all of Sharat Chandra's novels. So she used to say that. I mean, she didn't know the language, but she kind of knew the socio-cultural milieu, she said. And when she came to Calcutta, she began to do several things, which I always find fascinating. She's here and she was working before she came. She gave up a job when she moved to Calcutta. So that too was another new kind of thing for her. Also, as I write in my book, she never cooked before she came to Calcutta because she was working from a very young age, and her mother did not allow her to cook because she was working and studying simultaneously. So even the kitchen was a new space for her. So she had to learn all of this. And that was something that my mother enjoyed doing, the learning bit, because she learned several things after she moved to Calcutta to kind of adjust to life in Calcutta. And one of the things that she spoke very often is about how she picked up the language by going to the bazaar and speaking to the vendors out there, by talking to the maids and other people, by watching Bengali films. And I do mention her saying that, initially she didn't understand a single word of what was being said in the films. But then over a period of time, and she loved watching films, she was working before she got married. She was her last posting was in Hyderabad. She was staying in a working woman's hostel in Hyderabad, the bigger city that she moves to before she moves to Calcutta. And there she got this opportunity to watch a lot of films, Hindi films. And when she came to Calcutta, she continued the Hindi films, but she also started to watch Bengali films. And it is through these negotiations that she picked up Bangla. And she also picked up not just the spoken Bangla, she could even read and write Bangla. And she was all self-taught, completely self-taught. I mean, she never had it. I mean, she did not learn with the alphabet. She used to say that she looked at posters, film posters, and tried to understand which letter is which. And that's how she learned to read and write. And she learned it so well that she could read a Bangla newspaper, a Bengali newspaper, she could read. Right. She never tried her hand at writing, but she always said that if I want, I could write. She never had the need for that. And she spoke Bangla with a Telugu accent, which we always pointed out, both me and my sister. But she was very proud of that. The fact that she could speak a language which she had learned all by herself, and she could carry on a long conversation in Bangla. And people actually enjoyed listening to that Bangla. It sounded very different. It was grammatically correct, but it sounded very, very different. So it is here in all of these that, she picks up little things as she moves around, as she negotiates her way in the city that became her home. So, and because she was reading a lot, and because, she was away from her parents, her mother at that point of time stayed in Kakinada. And I do remember my father mentioning that till I joined school, every 2 months she went off to Kakinada. Right, because I can understand how much she must have missed all of it. And now when I go back and meet her cousins and other things, I do understand that it was a big social community that she had given up, cousins and extended family and all of that. And here in Kolkata, it was just my father and my mother. And then both of our sisters. So she went back every 2 months. She traveled to Kakinada all the way from Kolkata till I joined school. After which, of course, the schedules had to be formalized. She could only go during vacations. And the other thing that she kept her connected to the Telugu identity is also she got books from Hyderabad on a regular basis. There was a library which sent books she had to buy. And she bought these books. They used to come every month. Novels which were published would come home every month. And I do recall her reading all of that with great interest. So she tried to, as much as possible. These are days before we had the telephone at home. So it was only the inland letter, which kind of was the connect between her and her mother and her sisters. And when she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and after a period of time, one of the areas in which I noticed a drastic change is when it came to language, right? So she would speak to the caregiver in Bangla and fluent conversation going on, and suddenly she would move into Telugu and she would continue to speak Telugu, oblivious to the fact that the person in front of her doesn't understand Telugu. And I have been told that because the older memory is the one that remains for a longer period of time, that's the reason why this is happening to her. So that was the language that she communicated in most when there was an advancement in the Alzheimer's in her. And unfortunately, of course, in the last 2 years of her life, she completely stopped talking as well. She forgot how to speak, right? But that's not to say that she was not responding. She was responding, but these responses were of a very different nature. So, it makes one feel very bad about, seeing this kind of a change, but that was what was happening. And even her food preferences changed a bit towards the end because of what Alzheimer's was doing to her. But so she was recreating her little bit of Andhra in the kitchen, in the food habits that she, and in the kind of reading that she was doing, because that was something that she could do in the way in which she could keep in touch. So with the little bit of home that she had left. But I do not ever recall her complaining or, speaking about how she was not getting what she wanted to, because each time she went back to Kakinada or later Hyderabad, she made sure she bought a little bit of Hyderabad, a little bit of Kakinada along with her, whatever little bit that she could bring back. And I also remember as children, we were, though we've always lived in Kolkata, but these trips to Kakinada and then Hyderabad were something that we cherished immensely, looked forward to. And though we had, me and my sister initially would have a little problem with the language because we were not very fluent in Telugu. It would take us some time to get used to the language that is spoken there. But even after we came back, we spoke about our trips, and we spoke about, what we did. And it was there. The hangover, if I could use, would remain with all of us for a very, very long time. And we would then begin the planning for the next kind of a thing. So I think her memory, and that's what makes it very poignant, because I think her memory was something that actually made her settle in this new city and negotiate the new city, because she was very familiar with the city. She moved around because later on she began to work as well here in Calcutta. So she was able to negotiate her way through the city till the nerves decided to play up, and her memory went bad.
Thank you, Nishi. It's obvious you get your love for literature from your mother. So yeah. And Mona, moving on to your next question. Mahua, your protagonist, is not entirely displaced from her place of belonging, but she's displaced from a bloodline, and later in your novel from her own body in many ways. So you show displacement needn't necessarily be about crossing borders or crossing a line, but it also can be internal. So was it deliberate to show Mahua in that light, or what was the thought that went into it?
Absolutely. That's a wonderful observation. And I really marvel at the kind of questions that you've lined up for us, Monisha. It takes great insight, to line up questions with that depth. So I hope we'll be able to do justice. So, absolutely, you're right in your observation because for me, physical displacement is only one kind of an exile. A lot happens alongside. Some of the deepest displacements happen without anyone ever leaving home as well. She stayed back in Pakistan, but she was completely displaced from the society, from people around her food, her mannerisms, everything that she held dear to herself. She was completely distant from it because the chaos, which was even outside the Haveli, even when Yashvir was there and Yashoda were there, Maharaj and Naz, everybody were there. The chaos outside the Haveli was also accelerating the collapse within people. So it didn't start with partition, it started well before that. So all these things were happening. So Mahua loses not only a place, but also about a certainty about who she was. She's separated from her family. She's denied the freedom to choose a groom, to stay with the one that she loved, and then forced to hate the one that she loved. And she was then burdened by all those labels. And eventually, when she confronts the truth, it alters her very identity. Finally, towards the end of the book, when Amy comes for her, at that time it changes her complete identity. I mean, all along, all your life, you have lived with a certain belief, a certain faith of hating the people you felt have wronged you. And then suddenly everything is turned on its head. How does it feel? You are almost 80. And how does it feel to understand and come to the very realization and the very reckoning that everything was a lie? So her journey reflects the exile, which is also experienced by many people who feel disconnected from their past or the relationship or the sense of self. That is why I always, when I was writing this book, I was seeing this book as being more about partition, the inner grief, the quiet voices, and then turning everything on its head. Because what happens during this moment of reckless and mindless rage changes people completely. How their life changes and whatever they come to believe so far was an absolute abject lie. For example, like I said, that people used to call Mama Jan or Fufa or Mosi, and suddenly those people don't have your back anymore. On the contrary, there are also people from other faiths and other religions who protected you. So, what does it, what is the kind of feeling? What is this mental navigation that you go through when you realize that these are your friends? And when the moments are there which test your integrity, when with the moments that test your character, most of the people that you loved fail, and the ones uh, that you believe were not your own people, they were the ones who had your back. So it is about, in many ways, that human beings become strangers to themselves also. And the same thing happened with Mawa. She became a stranger to herself. We can be displaced by grief, by geography, by prejudice, by memories, you name whatever, or by circumstances beyond our control. But but then there's an inner system of thought as well, which happened with Mahua, because everything changed for her. And then why the muteness? Many people have asked me this question: that why was she mute. You could have, you could have limited her injuries to a displaced limb, a lost limb, or memory, or whatever, by why muteness. But for me, Mahua's muteness became symbolic of an entire generation of women whose pain remained undocumented. So Mahua also teaches us that belonging is not something that we inherit. Sometimes it is also the space that we create, the space with love, the space with peace, the space with of habit that there is, the space of acceptance. And when all these things are taken away from that person, no matter in which part of the planet they stay, it is the peace, their acceptance. When this space is erased from their lives or taken away from their lives, they don't belong anywhere. It becomes extremely difficult for people to reconcile. What happened with most of the people who came to Hindustan, as my grandparents would tell me, they said that we were carrying the keys to our locked homes because there was always this hope that we will go back, right? Because that was their space. They could not come to grips with the fact that they would never go back. So, weeks turned into months and months turned into years. And then came that silent anguish. And that is why there are not so many dialogues in my book, as you stated in your first question. Because then there was silence, because no matter what they said could, assuage the pain or the grief that they were feeling. Words were never enough. So there was deep anguish and silence. I would ask my grandmother, so okay, so did you do the same things in Pakistan? And never ever got answers. She would just go quiet, and then you could hear them weeping in the evenings. And later, maybe a couple of days later, they would come up with an answer. So that reconciliation was very difficult. And the same thing I reflected through Mahua, the inability to reconcile with their fate.
Thank you, Mona. That was a beautiful answer. I was especially reminded of a very poignant scene where Amy goes back to the Haveli. It was
Yes.
heartbreaking in many ways. So, yeah, I
Yeah.
was reminded of that scene when you
That's a
spoke.
disconnection, right? She just can't see the Haveli as Haveli anymore. There are so many occupants, there are so many kabzas there are 5 or 6 families living, and they look at her as if she's a stranger. So you are a stranger to your past, you are a stranger to your present, and then you have an uncertain future. So this is what partition did to so many people. And uncertainty always brings with it fear and anger.
Thank you, Mona. Moving on to you, Debbie. This is again about fear, what Mona had told. So, since your novel deals with exile, and there's grief, there's anger, there's everything, but something that dominates all of these emotions is fear, because you're running for your life and you're crossing borders, and there's safety the safety is that there's a question of safety wherever you're going to. So fear dominates the narrative. So what was it like to capture that in your book, and how has literature captured this over the ages, depending on your reading, based on all the books that you've read for the going into your novel? So how has literature captured that fear?
You know, while researching for this book, I realized, just reading about the history of Tibet and Kalimpong and the people and the geography and the way they dress up, just that bit, or the political unrest, just that bit is not going to do for me. I also have to understand how human emotions work, how human relationships work, especially when put under external circumstances as grim as a war, or a catastrophic event. So when I read, one thing I tell you, which has been common across my findings of literature, which I tell you is varied across, migrations in Syria, Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, you name it, Yemen and Libya, Palestine, all these places, fear is constant in migration literature. And the research was not just limited to reading. It was also watching a lot of documentary, watching a lot of podcasts and YouTube videos. So what kind of fear was the next question? the immediate answer that might strike you is about what lies ahead, immediately ahead, what will happen tomorrow if I die. But strangely, that aspect of fear, of course, it's there, it's always there, suspended somewhere. But the depth of the fear is, what if I lose my language? What if I lose my culture? What if, the fear that my next generation and the generations thereafter will only inherit fragments of, my culture, if at all. So that fear, right? That's what I have seen, is a very common factor across all these literature that I have read. But again, what was very striking is migration life will, maybe your exile is for a couple of hours to a couple of days, but the impact is lifelong. And that impact, of being documented, of living through documents, and might be thrown out at any point, that fear is always there. Your migrant life will not let you live without fear. But at the same time, you will not be able to live without hope. So fear is very, very, intricately intertwined with hope in each of these books. Otherwise, why would you breathe for the next moment? Why would you wake up for the next day? And the same happens to my characters here. They build a new life. When they land in Kalimpong, one of the characters is seen that she doesn't know the language. On the way, all that she has learned is she needs to, whoever she needs to go and say, Namaste, India. Namaste, India. Right? And nothing else. So from that point till making a livelihood, making a resolve to find your loved one someday, that kind of hope intertwined with fear is something I feel very attractive about migrant literature, because otherwise we wouldn't know. You and I have not lived through that, so it's only literature through which we get to know, if at all, the quantum or the height and depth and width of the fear and of the misery and of the hope. And ultimately, it boils down to hoping that these strangers all around in the new place would definitely have a place for the songs of mercy more than the cries of hate. So that's the hope that they learn to build and they learn to, live with. Has been what my finding is, and that's something that I've tried to show in my book as well.
Thank you, Debalina. So now I'm going to throw open a question to all of you. What do you think it is to truly belong as women? What do you think it is to belong in our bodies, in our homes, in our communities? So how would you define belonging? Nishi? I'm sorry, Nishi, you're on mute.
Yeah, for me, I think it would be a sense of a deep connect to the place that I am in, an emotional connect, a psychological connect to where my moorings are, where I am rooted in. And as when Devolina was talking about, she's talking about questions of whether we lose culture and identity. I also think that in my case, my moorings, my being rootedness also involves a kind of negotiation between two different cultures and two different identities, though there was an attempt at home to make us learn Telugu after we were fluent in Bangla and English. But my parents never kind of pressurized us to learn Telugu, because there's one thing that my parents always very strongly believed in, particularly my mother, and that is that there would be a time when you would become very conscious of your identity, the Telugu bit of your identity, because the Bangla bit would automatically be there. And that's what I find, me doing now, going back to learning Telugu all over again and working with the language, in trying to work with the language in the same way as I work with Bangla. So I think it is this sense of being able to negotiate between the cultures. And I think both of these languages, both of these cultures are a very important part of who I am. So it is this space, while I am here in this geographical space of Bengal, I'm also very much, I also have the Telugu bit of me rooted with me as part of my identity. So for me, it is a question of, an emotional and a psychological connect to where I am. What are, things that are part of my identity, things that speak about the community that I am part of, and also, the personal space, which I'm also negotiating through objects, as almost all of us here have been speaking about material memory in various ways as well. And I think that also is something that keeps me belonging or rooted to one particular, what my identity is all about.
Thank you, Nishi. Moving on to you, Mona.
Well, the sense of belonging is something which is very conditional for me, Monisha. It is very conditional because, see, what happens, especially for women, right? When women are born, they belong to the parents. And then as you're growing up, you are trying to find your moorings. Then in a traditional Indian society, and also societies across the world, in fact, you belong to a husband, you belong to a brother, you belong to a particular family. So forever there's a label when it comes to women, and people assume that it is that they belong to a label. But yes, women never belong to a particular label, right? Because it is easy for society to define women through those relationships rather than their own identities. And that is why most of the time women are struggling with the sense of belonging, because everything is your identity. Who do you belong to? Who are you married to? Where have you, how far have you studied? Which school did you go to? So, all those things, it is because of all these labels that women find it very difficult to belong to a particular place, because there is no sense of confidence, there is no sense of acceptance unless and until you are rising to the occasion, or you are fitting into the benchmark that society expects from you, right? So, I feel over time I have come to believe that belonging is less about geography and more about being seen, accepted, and valued for what you are. Your home is merely a place, but the very space where a woman feels that she is confident, she feels safe, she feels that it is, she can make a choice and she can make a point, that is when a woman certainly belongs to a particular place. Yes, I believe that, borders make it, when people move across borders, it gets very difficult for them. And that is why there is a study which says that no matter where people go, if they find the food of their choice, and as Nishi puts it so beautifully, the language that they understand, and then they can converse in, they settle. They feel that they belong to a particular place. So, when people are, even children are moving to different countries, so they are moving to, maybe a person, an Indian who's going to Poland, will struggle with language part, will struggle with availability of food part. On the other hand, if a child is moving to UK, you will have Tesco stocking up everything from your pan masala to your sambar masala that there is, and you'll see many Indians around you. That is why they belong more to UK than they would belong to a place like Poland, for that matter. But for a woman, it also comes, there's an additional baggage that she needs to carry with her, which is of acceptance, which is of the non-labeling part on her identity, where she is not somebody who belongs to a particular family or is married to somebody, but she is the person that she is, and she's respected for something like that. That is where I think belonging is more about being comfortable, being in that, finally finding that comfort zone in an alien society. Now all the people who were displaced from Pakistan, who are in India, so you see the kind of markets that they have put up, whole of the Greater Kailash, whole of the Kirti Nagar, whole of the Patel Nagar. So they have business establishments over there. Now they belong. Earlier they did not. They are in the same place. But now they belong. Earlier they were not. So I think belonging is more about inner acceptance as well as about outer acceptance.
Thank you, Mona. I've written down belonging is conditional, of course, with due credits.
Great.
Okay,
Thank
and
you.
you, Debbie? Yeah.
I think what you said, Mona, is very modern and very you know very up for a modern woman, right? We do not belong to the tag of any relationships. I really I think we all agree to that. Mm, and there was the conflict when I was writing this novel, that when I have these women characters who are in their teens, they have crossed the borders. They do not have any society, so to say. So they are not conforming to societal relationships. Their belonging is beyond just, the mountains, the monasteries, the Himalayas, or anything. For them, for these little girls, it is the relationships that they hold on to, right? They don't have anything else. It's like a no man's land with a lot of strangers around you. And it's just those friendships, the siblinghood, the motherhood, that you have, that you really hold on to. So in the context of the novel, there is a character called Pema. It's not just about her always dreaming about going back to Tibet someday, right? But it is also about holding on to the memories of a lost friend, of a lost brother, of a lost daughter, right? Memories of friendship before a particular gruesome betrayal happens. So all the memories very much etched into relationships. That's where my characters have found belongingness. They are very much different from how I am. I have a say, I do say, but they don't know who to talk to. They don't even know the language. So for them, belongingness would always mean relationships that they might have lost and might never, get back to, but that's all they have. So that's their wealth. So yeah, that's my take on belongingness for women who have migrated to a different place, leaving everything back.
Thank you, Debbie. And Mona, one question. I'm coming to you again. You just spoke about collective hatred, and your novel is, based on lived history and also what you heard from your grandparents and orally. So, based on all these stories that you heard, both orally and the ones you read, how do you make sense of this collective hatred? Like you said, the neighbor you love very much next day becomes the enemy just because someone tells you that he is. So how did you make sense of that and channel it into your book?
Yes, there is so much of violence in the book. When my friends who've read the book, they come and they say, "My God, this is such a Jekyll and Hyde personality that you have, Mona. You don't look it, but this is so much of violence and gruesome hatred in the book. So where does that come from?" So I said, "Yeah, there's a part of me that you don't know." Well, coming back to your answer. So, writing The River That Remembers made me realize one thing, Manisha, and that is that people really begin by hating one another. Nobody hates the other person to begin with. More often, they begin by fearing one another when it comes to warfare, when it comes to when any social unrest, any religious unrest for that matter, they begin by fearing one another, not hating. But when this fear is left unquestioned, when this fear does not find any closure, when they are looking out for any certainty, an escape from this fear, and they are not able to do that, that is when people start dividing themselves, the crowd, into us and them. Because that is where finally there's a certainty, right? This person hates me because I am us, I belong to the us gang. This person is I hate this person because they belong to the them gang. Because making these particular labels, no, Monisha, makes it easier to justify the cruelty and the hatred. And this is basically what happens with people. So, when we speak about partition, it is perhaps history's one of greatest reminders that, neighbors who shared the festivals, meals, even grief, right? And suddenly see one another through completely different lens, a lens of religion and identity. Yes, alongside that unimaginable violence that there was, there were also equally extraordinary acts of courage where people risked their own lives to save the other person from another community. My grandmother mother would always say this, बच्चों को मजहबों का इल्म नहीं होता, वो तो निकल जाते हैं मंदिरों को सलाम करते करते. So she said that as children, we would ask, why are we fighting? Why are we fighting Fufa Jan? Why are we fighting? Why is your Ammi fighting with my Ammi? Why are we burying the things? So children don't know. Children don't know that hatred. But once they move to Hindustan, or the other people who move to the other side of the border, that is when, after that fear culminated into hatred. And when I was writing this book, because we as writers are hefting a huge responsibility on our shoulders, we are not propagating hate. And that is why I resisted portraying any community as entirely as a victim or as a villain. I wanted readers to see that it was not something that they inherited. It was something that was cultivated, which was a result of a sprout that was sown by somebody else, but not them. And then, in case hatred can be cultivated, which is a virtue, which is a feeling, then even compassion can be cultivated. And that is why I wanted to write about the relationship between Yashoda and Naz, the beautiful friendship between Devika and Naz again. So ultimately, even my book is less about why people hate one another. It is in the darkest of times, it is also about people choosing their humanity over division. And because I wanted the readers to leave the book once they finish reading the book with a belief that history should be remembered not basically to preserve any bitterness or violence, but also the empathy that there was. So the younger generation, as it is so emotionally burdened by by so many things. The only thing I do not want the younger generation to be burdened with after reading my book is because of the moral failures of their older generation. And that is why the book was dealt with this kind of structuring.
Thank you, Mona. And again, a common question to all three of you. The borders, the so-called borders that we set for ourselves, those are set for us. It could be physical, mental, emotional, or whatever. Are those borders truly porous? Do you believe it is porous? I'll start with you, Nishi.
It depends, actually. In my case, the borders are porous. In the kind of writing that I have done for the book that we've been talking about, the borders are porous because, I suppose, of the nature of the kind of intermingling and negotiations of language and identity out here. I suppose in Mona's case, there would be even more hard and steadfast borders because of the nature of the conflict that is there. But in my case, I suppose they are much more porous because, there is no the conflict. I mean, I wouldn't even call it a conflict. I would more call it a negotiation between languages, between cultures, that I and my family were negotiating here in Kolkata. So I would think, with reference to what I have written in my book, yes, they are porous.
Thank you,
That's the
Nishi.
reason why a lot of the Bengali
Yeah.
part comes into. So the book is as much as about a Telugu family in Bengal, in Calcutta, as it is about the city itself. So the city and its people, the language, its cultural scene, everything comes in. So you kind of I would like to think of the book as a kind of document of cultural memory.
Thank you, Nishi. Moving on to you, Mona.
Well, when it comes to marking the borders, right? So we are separating landforms. We are separating we are separating the demographics. But what is it that was never separated? The shared history. How can anybody separate that shared history that there was of people? How can one take away that feeling of a place? How can one take away the recipes, as Debalina has put it and Nishi has put it so beautifully, both of them? How can anybody take away those recipes? How can anybody take away those customs? How can anybody take away those wants and needs which are deeply rooted, deeply sedimented in where people are actually coming from? You never ever lose it, because they feel that this is not our custom. Though we are in Hindustan, this is not our custom. This is not the way we did things, right? So I guess those borders are porous. Those lines are porous because people take away a lot with them than what they leave behind. What they leave behind are material things, but what they take with them are years and centuries of culture, centuries of belief, centuries of traditions that continue with their lineage. So I guess borders are just lines. Rest everything is porous.
Thank you, Mona.
How beautiful, put, Mona. I think, both of you have said already what I had to say. But if I talk about the Dalai Lama moving from Tibet to India, look at what he has brought along, right? Borders are just lying to your words, Mona. You bring along so much with you, and look at what he's created here in India, in a foreign land. Right, so many monasteries. I think the huge monastery consecrated in 1976 was the one in Kalimpong, and so many thereafter. And the huge followers that he has here, that itself advocates that borders are always porous.
Yeah.
Borders are always porous.
And one point, if I'm permitted to make. Can I, Monisha?
Yeah, please go ahead, Mona. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Yes, one point, also because, see, pertaining to our books, since all of us are speaking about our books per se, and of course, there are these cumulative questions as well. Pertaining to my book, I mean, what happened to Radcliffe after having drawn that line? Making borders is also not easy. It is as difficult as crossing them. What happened to him? What kind of mental and emotional trauma the man went through when he saw the massacre, when he saw that reckless, mindless rage, when he saw the the women being violated because they were the vessels of dignity for a particular family, for children to be displaced, to be abducted, to be raped, and not knowing their real names, and now they don't know which side they actually belong to, because so many people have newer lives. There are people who have newer lives in Hindustan and people who had a newer life in Pakistan. And there were children who don't even remember their original names or nationality or even their religion for that matter. So everything is porous because grief flew and flowed both ways.
Thank you, Mona. Thank you for the beautiful
Thanks,
point there. And Debalina, moving on to you. How did was it difficult to capture that distress behind separation when you leave? That deep sadness and the distress that carries a person carries during an exile. So was it difficult to capture that in your book? And considering that you haven't experienced anything like that, or even heard of anything like that through your personal history or, through your ancestry. So was it difficult to get that bit straight in your book?
It was definitely a challenge, and to navigate through the miseries of human life and the complexities that you are always in a conflict of. It's better to forget, but then again you are not able to forget what has come upon you, and then moving on with life, but then again you would like to finish your life then and there. So that constant conflict to go on with life, even though you have absolutely no willingness, having lost everybody in your family in some cases. So the horrific accounts of these migrants, they are there all across, books and online media. When you hear them, it's lesser about, so people do not talk much about the history or the historical details after so many years. What has remained in their mind and memory is the fear that what would have happened, what would have come over their near and dear ones. Right? That kind of fear and that kind of capturing that kind of emotion was definitely a challenge. But when I did start writing this novel as a novelist, I did not want to recreate history. The historical accuracy was always there. I made the characters enter the stage while the backdrop was already set for them. And in that canvas, I sort of tried to play along with the relationships, the emotions, everything in the backdrop of the Dalai Lama also escaping, taking a longer, safer route, along with his family members escaping after a few days, taking a shorter route. And that's where the protagonist and her companions get in touch with that group. So you see, everything has been um, intertwined with history, but at the same time the shared losses between what we actually know of the Dalai Lama's family members and the accounts of those, mingling that with my characters. When I tried to do that, that sort of became slightly easier as the dialogues, sort of flew between the real characters and my fictional characters. That sort of, in a way, took the story ahead quite a distance, because that's how dialogues are meant, right? So that's how, in a lot of ways, the plot opened up for me when I was trying to describe the struggle. Right. So yeah, dialogues did it for me between the real life characters and the fiction characters.
Thank you, Debbie. And Nishi, the final question to you. Have you ever asked your mother what home truly meant to her or how she defined it?
I didn't ask her in that way, but I do remember that for both my parents, people would often ask them, particularly when they were towards the end of their professional careers, whether they would be going back and whether they would consider moving back. But I do remember both my parents saying no to that, because by that time Kolkata had become home and none of them actually wanted to go back to either Kakinada or Hyderabad or any other place in then undivided Andhra Pradesh. For both of them, home meant that space where they had this sense of emotional attachment and also a kind of rootedness to the geographical location as well. So both of them never wanted, and this is not to say that they did not have very strong ties with folk back home. They did. They went back very often. They traveled frequently to attend weddings and even if there was no wedding, an annual trip back was a common thing that we did. When we were younger, we had more than one trip, but from the time we were in college, we just had one autumn trip because we have a long Durga Puja vacation when we were studying. So they had strong ties with their folk, and I still have very strong connections with all of their relatives. So we went back, we kept in touch, everything was there. But for both my parents, my mother inclusive, I mean, she would go, after she retired, she would go and stay for longer periods of time, but she would always want to come back to Kolkata. There was also one time when she decided to cut short her visit because she had begun to feel homesick for Kolkata. So for them, home was Calcutta, the place to which they were much more emotionally attached. Though for both, Kolkata was a place that they moved to much later. My father was, both of them, my mother was in her late 20s, my father was in his 30s when he came to Calcutta. But for both of them, this was where they had their moorings. This was where they felt more rooted in spite of all the differences. This was where they were most comfortable.
Thank you, Nishi. And thank you, Mona, and thank you, Debelina, for a truly wonderful conversation. For someone like me who's rooted in this state, who's never crossed the borders to even make a living or to study, it was very insightful listening to you speak and to listen to all the emotions that to go through between the leaving and the comings. So thank you for this beautiful conversation.
Thank you so for your questions, which made us actually talk and come up with things that we have been concerned with in our respective books. Thank you so much, Monisha.
Thank you, Nishi.
Thank you, Monisha, for the wonderful questions. You certainly spent so much of time, and we truly appreciate that. And I learned so much from both Nishi and Debalina, the way they elaborated, on their life journeys and their books, and the way they've structured their books was truly inspiring. I had a wonderful session, and this was such a great learning experience as well. And
Same here.
absolutely. Yeah. And thank you, Sabin, for always including us year after year, bearing with us. And our hums and haws and our gaps when we are still thinking. As to what to say to this wonderful question. But thank you for having us. It's been wonderful.
It's been pleasure being a part of this one.
Oh,
Yes.
it's our pleasure because I love the hums and the pauses and the conversation. So always a pleasure.
Thank you, Sabin, for this wonderful, wonderful opportunity. Thanks again,
Thank you,
everyone.
Manisha. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.